At dawn, Buenos Aires was still half asleep, wrapped in the dull haze of another gray April morning. The air tasted of iron and diesel. Out past the edge of the city, beyond the tram lines and the chain of old warehouses, stood the Hospital Provincial San Gabriel, a building that had survived coups, epidemics, and the quiet exhaustion of time. Its facade was pale yellow, streaked with rust where rain had run for decades, and the cross above the main gate leaned forward slightly, as if listening for a confession that would never come. Inside, the nurses' station hummed with the rhythm of night turning into day. A half-empty coffee cup steamed beside a ledger filled with inked names and room numbers. The smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming eucalyptus from the courtyard. There were only 28 patients that week, an unusually small number, and yet the place felt heavy, as though the air carried something unsaid. At 5:47 a.m., every light in the hospital flickered. No one reacted. Power surges were common, but then came a pulse, a vibration deep enough to shake the IV poles and rattle the window frames. The nurses looked at each other. The clock on the wall froze mid-tick. The sound stopped, and so did everything else. Outside, the early shift of doctors arriving at the gate saw the building blur for an instant, as if viewed through heat distortion. Then it was gone. No explosion, no collapse, just gone. In its place remained an oval depression in the soil, as smooth as glass, perfectly aligned to the hospital's old foundation. Grass and asphalt at its edges were burnt in a ring. Darker toward the center, the air shimmered faintly blue. By noon, military trucks had surrounded the site. The government declared a restricted perimeter. Families of patients gathered along the fences, shouting names into the void. None were answered. Satellite imaging later revealed the same anomaly. Where the hospital had stood, sensors registered zero reflection. An absence of shadow, as if light refused to touch the ground. Instruments jammed within 50 meters. Compasses spun north, then south, then stopped entirely. For 72 hours, that hollow remained untouched. Then, at precisely 5:47 a.m. on the fourth day, the hospital returned. No tremor preceded it, no thunder, no light. It simply was there again, standing exactly as before. The power lines that had once connected to it were gone, but lights glowed faintly in the windows. The doors were open. When the first responders entered, the floors were immaculate, the beds neatly made, sheets white and folded. No dust. The air smelled of rain and static. All equipment was in place. Only the people were missing, except for one. In room 212 lay a patient none of the staff recognized. A man in his 40s, wearing a hospital gown too small for him. His pulse was slow, 60 beats per minute, steady as a metronome. His skin was cool, yet when touched, it shimmered faintly with the same bluish glow seen in the grass outside. Pinned to his chest was a badge. Dr. Javier Aros, Physics Department, La Plata University. He had disappeared in 1976. The press never learned of this. The military sealed the building again within 24 hours, citing biohazard containment. The families received no explanation, but a few locals who lived nearby swore that in the nights following the reappearance, they heard the hospital humming, a low, steady tone that rose and fell like a living breath. In the following weeks, rumors surfaced among soldiers stationed there. They said the lights inside flickered at exact intervals, 62 seconds apart. That if you stood close to the walls, you could hear whispers, not words, but rhythms, as though the building were trying to breathe in time with them. Months later, the government quietly reactivated the San Gabriel complex for research purposes. The lead investigator was the same man found in room 212, Dr. Javier Aros. He had no memory of where he'd been during those lost 8 years, only fragments. A corridor bathed in white light, the feeling of being observed from inside the walls, a constant ticking sound that matched his heartbeat. He was told his presence in the hospital was classified as coincidence. He knew better. Aros returned to the building under military escort in October. When he stepped into the main corridor, he said it felt familiar, like walking into an unfinished dream. His instruments picked up faint electromagnetic fluctuations, a heartbeat recorded in static. Each pulse lasted exactly 62 seconds. He began to record. And on the tapes, amid the static, a phrase emerged, faint, almost mechanical. We are still inside. At night, the hospital seemed to exhale. The curtains on the upper floors moved without wind, and the faint sound of metal wheels echoed from distant corridors that should have been empty. The soldiers assigned to guard the perimeter called it la respiración, the breathing. They joked at first, until one of them didn't come back from patrol. Private Espinosa had been posted at the southern gate. The cameras showed him walking the same 30-meter loop until 3:14 a.m., when he turned toward the hospital's main entrance. For exactly 62 seconds, he disappeared from view. When the feed returned, the door stood open, swinging slightly. Espinosa was gone. His rifle was found the next morning on the steps, barrel still warm. His watch had stopped at 5:47. Dr. Javier Aros reviewed the footage over and over. The soldiers thought it was a glitch, but Aros saw something they didn't. A subtle distortion in the image, as if space had rippled inward, folding the air around the door. He had seen this before, in the data recorded when the hospital vanished months earlier. The same frequency, the same signature, the same impossible rhythm. He spent the next days analyzing the magnetic field inside the building. Every wall emitted a low, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't random. It followed the human heartbeat, slow, methodical, precise. The building was alive in some way he didn't yet understand. Instruments overloaded after exactly 10 minutes, as though the hospital were rejecting observation. Each time his team re-entered, they felt pressure in their ears and a faint metallic taste in their mouths, like blood. Aros began to believe the structure wasn't just responding, it was learning. He made an audio recording that later vanished from the archives, though a partial transcript survived in his notes. If time can repeat, maybe space can too. The building didn't vanish. It synchronized with something. Maybe it remembers itself, trying to find its proper moment. The next night, he and his assistant, Clara Dominguez, went deeper into the hospital's restricted wings. The lights flickered in measured intervals. They entered the maternity ward. The room smelled of iodine and lilac soap. The beds were made, each with a folded blanket. A faint outline appeared on one of the sheets, like a body had just risen and left. Aros placed his hand on the mattress. It was warm. They heard footsteps above them, slow and deliberate, one floor up. He checked his watch. 5:46. The footsteps stopped. 5:47. All lights died. In total darkness, the building came alive with sound. Distant voices murmuring in harmony. The metallic roll of carts, the creak of doors opening and closing in rhythm. Clara clutched his sleeve. The air grew thick, pulsing against their skin. The corridor stretched impossibly long. When he looked back, the door they had entered through was gone. Then, faintly, the same voice from the recordings, or maybe hundreds of voices woven together, spoke from the walls. "We are still working." Eros switched on his recorder. Static. Then a child's cry, brief and sharp, cutting through the noise. Clara ran toward it, vanishing around the corner. He followed, tripping over something that shouldn't have been there. A gurney blocking the path, its wheels rusted solid though the air smelled new. On it lay a figure under a sheet. He pulled the fabric back. It was Clara. Her eyes were open, glowing faintly blue. Her pulse was steady, 60 beats per minute. She whispered one word before the lights returned. "Remember." By the time the soldiers arrived, the ward was empty. The instruments in Aros's bag had recorded nothing but a continuous tone. The generals ordered him out of the building. He refused. In his report, now lost to official records, he wrote, "The structure doesn't destroy. It archives. Every person who enters becomes a part of its memory. The hospital is rebuilding itself out of what it remembers of us." That same night, several guards reported seeing lights flicker through the windows again, shapes moving behind them, people walking, working, tending invisible patients. But no one went inside. At 5:47, every bulb in the city district blinked once, perfectly synchronized. Then the hum stopped. Aros stood outside the gates as dawn broke, the cold wind cutting across his face. For the first time since he returned to San Gabriel, he felt the pull of something vast and conscious. Not evil, not divine, simply aware. He whispered to himself, "It's not a building, it's a heartbeat." And somewhere deep beneath the ground, the hospital exhaled again. Dr. Javier Aros no longer slept. He spent his nights seated at his desk, surrounded by printouts of spectrograms and magnetic field readings. lines of graphite drawn between patterns only he could see. The same frequency appeared everywhere, 62 seconds between peaks, as regular as breath. The hospital was pulsing again, preparing for something. He replayed Clara's final word over and over in his head. Remember. It wasn't a plea. It was instruction. Whatever force animated San Gabriel wanted to be remembered, wanted the act of remembrance to continue. Perhaps that was how it survived. He returned to the hospital one last time, with permission from no one. The guards no longer stopped him. Half of them had gone missing, and the rest avoided the gates entirely. The building's walls shimmered faintly under the moonlight, that familiar bluish glow visible through the windows. When he crossed the threshold, every light inside flared on at once. The halls were perfect. The paint was new. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lilacs. He heard distant footsteps echoing from a corridor that hadn't existed before. He followed the sound, each step drawing him deeper into the structure that had begun to change shape around him. Rooms shifted positions, doors appeared and vanished. It was as if the building were rearranging itself to match a memory it couldn't quite recall. He reached the operating theater. Instruments lay neatly on the tray, gleaming under harsh light. Beside them sat a stack of patient files, pristine, though the paper was brittle with age. He opened one and froze. The names belonged to people who had vanished 8 years earlier, the patients from the original disappearance in 1984. Each file had been filled out in his own handwriting. He dropped the folder. The floor beneath him vibrated softly, like a heartbeat pressing upward through stone. He realized then that the hospital had never truly left. It existed in both places, here, now, and somewhere else, trapped between pulses of its own memory. The hum intensified. Lights flickered to red. In the glass panel separating the observation room from the operating table, he saw movement. Dozens of figures standing in the reflection, surrounding him. He turned, but the room was empty. Only the reflections remained, silhouettes of nurses, doctors, patients, all standing motionless. Then, one by one, they began to move, their gestures synchronized, performing invisible tasks, adjusting instruments, lifting sheets, writing notes on air. They weren't ghosts. They were memories repeating themselves. Aros whispered, "You're not dead." From everywhere at once came a soft reply, 100 overlapping voices. "We're not finished." He stumbled back as the walls began to glow, the same phosphorescent light radiating through the plaster. Shapes of hands pressed outward from within, as if the walls themselves were breathing. He remembered his first measurements, the pulses, the pattern, the rhythm of 62 seconds, and realized what it represented. The building wasn't haunted. It was still operating. It was conducting its own procedures, using whatever essence of life remained inside its walls. He pulled out his recorder. "This is Eros, the hospital, San Gabriel. It's repeating. The structure has achieved a state of temporal resonance. It isn't bound to the present. It's existing across moments." The sound on his tape began to warp, bending his voice into an echo. Then another voice layered over his own. His voice, but older, slower, repeating the same words as if years apart. The two voices merged until he could no longer tell which was now. Then silence. From the far end of the hall, a door opened. A nurse stepped out, wearing a pristine 1940s uniform. She looked at him and smiled kindly, as though he were just another patient. "Doctor," she said softly, "your shift has started." He wanted to run, but his body refused. The corridor brightened. The clock above the operating room door ticked once. 5:47. The lights flared. Outside, soldiers on the perimeter radioed a sudden surge of electromagnetic activity. The building pulsed blue, and then there was nothing. No sound, no light, no structure. For 72 hours, the hospital ceased to exist. Again, when it returned, all equipment was intact. But there was one more name on the patient list, written in fresh ink. Aros Javier. His pulse, when they found him, was steady. 60 beats per minute. The ministry called it anomaly fatigue. They spoke of electromagnetic surges, ground conductivity, and atmospheric reflection errors. They blamed the humidity, the soil composition, the instability of post-dictatorship infrastructure, anything that could bury the impossible under paperwork. But among those who had seen the light of San Gabriel flicker like a lung, no one slept easily again. A new division was formed within the Argentine Defense Secretariat, Unidad de Fenómenos No Convencionales. It existed on no official record, funded by a column labeled Urban Maintenance. Its first and only objective: contain San Gabriel. The first directive was silence. The second was documentation. The third, though never written, was fear. Colonel Esteban Paredes led the operation. He was a man who had survived the junta's darkest years by obeying rules no one else could follow. He arrived at the site 2 days after the hospital's second reappearance, boots sinking into the ashen soil where the fences had once stood. The air was thick with static. He claimed the building hummed like a generator and that his watch skipped forward 12 minutes as soon as he stepped inside the gate. Paredes didn't believe in superstition. He believed in control. He ordered all entrances welded shut and the perimeter electrified. A team of 12 technicians was assigned to monitor electromagnetic output in 12-hour shifts. They lasted 6 days. By the end of the week, 4 had resigned without explanation. 1 vanished. The others refused to speak. Paredes brought in priests, then physicists, then, reluctantly, Aros. The doctor was thinner now, paler, his voice slower, each syllable separated by a heartbeat. The files say he stood at the threshold of the main corridor for nearly 5 minutes before crossing. He told Paredes the hospital was not a location, but an event. "You cannot fence an event," he said. "It happens wherever it remembers to." Inside, the air pressure fluctuated violently. The lights dimmed and brightened in rhythm. The readings on the monitors outside jumped with each pulse. One of the physicists whispered, "It's like a breathing frequency." Eros corrected him. "Not breathing, circulating, like blood returning to a heart." Paredes asked what he meant. Eros didn't answer. He only touched the nearest wall. The plaster was warm beneath his hand. "It's alive because we made it so," he said. "Every scream, every prayer, every act of mercy ever done here, it became structure. We built a living memory, and now it wants to continue." That night, a technician monitoring the magnetic readouts noticed something new. For the first time, the signal deviated. The pulse skipped, doubled, skipped again. It was as though the heartbeat of the building had stuttered. Then it stabilized, at exactly 62 beats per minute. Aros smiled when they told him. "That's not instability," he said. "That's communication." He requested to stay in the building alone. The colonel refused. 2 guards were assigned to accompany him. They entered at 11 p.m. At 11:03, all communication cut out. When the backup team entered at dawn, the 3 men were gone. The instruments were still active. On the monitors, the frequency line was flat. No pulse, no noise. Then, suddenly, a single spike appeared. The waveform printed itself onto the paper feed, repeating every 62 seconds. Across the top of each spike was an irregular modulation, something between pattern and code. When decoded, it formed 5 words in imperfect Spanish. "Continuamos con el turno." We are continuing the shift. The military ordered the signal jammed, but it persisted, bleeding through static into civilian radio bands for nearly an hour before fading. In the days that followed, people living near the district began reporting odd sensations. A faint metallic taste in tap water, static whispering through television screens even when turned off, streetlights flickering at precise intervals. Some said they heard soft music coming from the park, an old tango, skipping endlessly at the same bar. Eros's apartment was found empty. On the kitchen table lay his watch, ticking at 60 beats per minute. Inside the oven, the glass door reflected light from no visible source. When the ministry demanded a statement, Colonel Paredes filed only 1 page. "The building remembers. The problem is, it is starting to remember us." He retired the next day. That winter, San Gabriel began to hum again. The sound was faint, almost soothing, like the murmur of a crowded hallway. Only those who had entered before could hear it. For everyone else, there was only silence. But in the early hours, just before dawn, the sky above Buenos Aires glowed faintly blue, soft, rhythmic, breathing. And every clock within a kilometer of the hospital froze at 5:47. By late May, the hum had become constant. It was no longer something that came and went with dawn. It was an undercurrent that seemed to live in the very air of the district. Residents nearby described headaches, strange dreams, the sensation that their hearts were beating slightly out of rhythm with their own bodies. Doctors attributed it to stress, but no test could explain why every electrocardiogram from the neighborhood showed the same anomaly. A subtle delay between electrical impulse and muscular contraction. Exactly 62 milliseconds. Inside the sealed perimeter, vines crept up the hospital walls, yet none ever crossed the threshold of the main gate. Birds avoided the roof. The glass panes remained clean, as if the rain itself had learned to fall around them. One evening, a journalist named Lucia Falcon arrived at the gates. She was young, persistent, the kind who refused silence. Her father had been one of the patients listed as missing in 1984. She had grown up under the shadow of that absence, raised by the rumor that her father had simply stopped existing. Lucia had obtained fragments of Aros's early reports and the partial recording of the voice that said, "We are still inside." She wanted proof. Not of ghosts, but of truth. She bribed a guard, slipped through the fence, and entered the building alone. The air was still, heavy, like the breath before a word. Her flashlight beam stretched across polished floors, reflected against stainless doors. The silence pressed against her ears until she thought she could hear her own pulse echoing back. Then she realized it wasn't hers. The hum was everywhere. It vibrated softly through the soles of her shoes, up her legs, through her ribs. She moved down the corridor, camera in hand, recording everything. A faint trail of blue light pulsed along the baseboards, leading deeper inside, as if the building itself were guiding her. She followed. The maternity ward doors were open. Inside, the beds were perfectly made, the sheets unwrinkled. She aimed her flashlight toward the far wall and froze. Dozens of impressions pressed outward from the plaster, faintly luminous in the beam. They looked like the shapes of people standing behind the wall, hands raised, faces indistinct. She stepped closer. The air grew colder. Her camera flickered, the screen warping in and out of static. When it cleared, the wall was empty, smooth, white, new. Then came a voice behind her. "Miss Falcon." She turned. A man stood in the doorway, tall, gaunt, wearing a doctor's coat that looked too clean to be real. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless. The badge on his chest read, "Dr. Javier Aros." "I know why you're here," he said. "You're looking for someone." Lucia tried to speak, but her throat closed around the words. He gestured for her to follow. He led her through the corridor in silence. The light seemed to move ahead of them, turning corners before they did. They reached an elevator that should have been sealed decades ago. Its doors opened on their own, revealing a faint, endless glow below. Aros stepped inside. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Neither should I," he said. They descended without motion, without sound. The numbers on the panel blinked, but never changed. When the doors opened, Lucia saw a room she could not fully comprehend. Rows of hospital beds stretched into infinity, fading into mist. On each one lay a figure, perfectly still, breathing in unison. Monitors beside them pulsed with blue light instead of numbers. A faint chorus of heartbeats filled the air, layered like waves. She recognized faces among them, some young, some old, all from different decades. The living and the dead, sharing the same rhythm. Aros stopped beside one bed. "This is why it remembers," he said softly. "We never stopped caring for them." Lucia looked down. The man on the bed was her father. He looked asleep, peaceful, untouched by time. His chest rose and fell slowly, every breath a perfect 62 seconds apart. Tears blurred her vision. She reached out to touch him, but Aros caught her wrist. "If you touch him, you'll join the memory," he said. "The building doesn't take people. It preserves them. You'll become part of the rhythm." "I don't care," she said. "He's my father." Aros hesitated. His expression was not cruelty. It was sorrow. "You don't understand. I already did." He lifted his sleeve. His arm shimmered faintly beneath the skin, veins glowing pale blue. He was becoming the building. Lucia stepped back, shaking. The hum grew louder, deeper, surrounding them both. The floor began to tremble. Above, the walls rippled like the surface of a pond. "The cycle is starting again," Aros said. "It always begins when someone remembers too clearly. Memory calls it back." The lights flared white. The air split open with a crack of thunder. The entire room convulsed, then vanished into light. Outside, the guards saw the glow rising through the roof, spreading outward in concentric waves, expanding into the sky like ripples of heat. The entire city flickered. And then, once more, Hospital San Gabriel ceased to exist. When the light withdrew, it did so like breath. Slow, reluctant, almost tender. The park that now occupied the old hospital grounds was empty, windless, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Then came the sound, a faint resonance, not quite music, not quite machinery, vibrating beneath the surface of the soil. The streetlights around the perimeter flickered in perfect sequence, one by one, tracing the outline of the vanished building. From above, satellites captured an impossible phenomenon, a faint, symmetrical glow radiating from the ground, forming the precise blueprint of San Gabriel. It pulsed exactly once every 62 seconds. The coordinates were transmitted automatically to the Defense Secretariat, where no one dared open the report. Deep underground, beneath the surface that now shimmered like mist, Lucia Falcon woke in darkness. She couldn't tell if she was lying down or floating. Her limbs felt weightless, her heartbeat too loud. Around her, whispers. She turned her head toward the nearest voice and saw, dimly, hundreds of faint blue shapes breathing in rhythm, human outlines without features, their forms shifting like smoke. "Where am I?" she whispered. The answer came not from one voice, but from many, layered and harmonic. "You are inside the remembrance." A single figure emerged from the haze, Dr. Javier Aros. His features were half dissolved, as though sculpted from light. "It isn't death," he said gently. "It's repetition. The building has become a form of memory. When it reappears, we are what it remembers." Lucia trembled. "Can I leave?" "Only if it forgets you." The glow pulsed brighter, and the air trembled with a sound like 1,000 synchronized heartbeats. In the distance, she saw the corridor stretching endlessly in both directions. Doors, beds, instruments, all luminous and weightless. Between the walls, the shapes of nurses moved without touching the floor, their hands adjusting invisible sheets, their gestures identical, cyclical, eternal. She stepped forward. The ground rippled beneath her feet, firm but liquid. Every step echoed through the air like a drop of water falling into stillness. The corridor seemed to recognize her. The lights brightened as she moved. When she reached the first door, she saw a plaque she could not read. The letters rearranged themselves constantly, like sentences being rewritten. Behind it, something breathed. "This is what happens when a place remembers too much," Eros said, his voice now coming from everywhere at once. "It stops belonging to time. Every act of care that ever happened here, the prayers, the screams, the mercy, it layered upon itself until space collapsed. The hospital no longer exists in one moment. It exists in all its moments at once." Lucia covered her ears. "Then how can it end?" He paused. "Perhaps by forgetting, but forgetting means losing what we are." The hum rose again. The walls began to flicker, images flashing in rapid succession. Faces of doctors, nurses, patients. All the moments of the hospital's history compressed into a storm of light. Lucia saw her father holding her as a child, her mother standing by the bed, Aros taking notes, soldiers shouting, every era folding into the next until chronology disintegrated. She screamed, and the light shattered. When her eyes adjusted, she was standing alone in the middle of an empty ward. No glow, no figures, no sound, just silence. The beds were rusted, the windows broken. Sunlight streamed through the holes in the ceiling, dust floating like ash. She could hear distant traffic, cars, horns, the living world. She stumbled toward a doorway half buried in debris and emerged into the open air. The hospital was gone. In its place stood a wide field of pale earth, cracked and still warm. Behind her, a faint shape shimmered, translucent, fading, the outline of the building dissolving into nothing. Lucia looked down at her hands. Faint blue veins glowed beneath her skin. The hum lingered inside her, steady, unbroken, 60 beats per minute. Somewhere below the ground, a last pulse rippled outward. The soil quivered and stilled. Later that day, government sensors registered one final electromagnetic spike at the coordinates of San Gabriel. It lasted exactly 72 seconds. Then the signal disappeared forever, or almost forever. Months later, across the city, patients in unrelated hospitals began reporting the same dream. A long corridor, light without source, and a voice whispering, "Continue the shift." Doctors dismissed it as collective anxiety, but nurses began noticing something else. Old clocks starting on their own, ticking perfectly in time, as though syncing to an unseen rhythm. No one mentioned the faint scent of disinfectant that came and went with the dawn, or the brief flicker of blue light in the reflection of their monitors. And at 5:47 every morning, all at once, the power lines across Buenos Aires emitted a sound too low to hear, but deep enough to feel, vibrating through concrete and bone. A quiet, steady heartbeat. Within weeks of the final anomaly, silence became the government's official explanation. The Ministry of Health issued a brief statement about structural collapse due to electromagnetic interference, and then nothing more. The name San Gabriel was erased from every registry. Construction permits were denied for the land. Its coordinates were redacted from public records. Yet despite all attempts at burial, the phenomenon began to spread like a rumor with its own gravity. In laboratories, physicists argued about the data that had leaked. Those impossible electromagnetic spikes synchronized to the rhythm of a heartbeat. Some whispered that the human nervous system had been measured pulsing in unison with the Earth's magnetic field for the first time. Others dismissed it as urban folklore. But at the University of La Plata, in a lecture hall dimly lit and sealed against reporters, a group of researchers gathered around a table of scattered files. At its center lay a thin folder marked with one phrase in pencil, Arros hypothesis. The only surviving copy of Arros's notes had surfaced in a military archive months after his disappearance. It contained fragments of equations, anatomical sketches merged with architectural diagrams, and sentences written as if in feverish revelation. If space can remember, then the act of healing becomes structure. If time can repeat, then every act of compassion loops endlessly. The building is not haunted, it is faithful. The researchers read in silence. No one dared speak the obvious. One of them, Dr. Esteban Ledesma, a neurologist, finally broke the stillness. If he's right, he said, then consciousness isn't bound to the individual. It's cumulative, shared, stored. The hospital became a neural network of memory. Another replied, then what happened wasn't a haunting. It was a synapse. They published nothing, but a rumor spread among graduate students that the experiments performed on isolated environments, sealed rooms with repeated prayers or medical procedures, sometimes showed inexplicable electromagnetic fluctuations. The air, they said, learned. Meanwhile, across Buenos Aires, the ordinary people closest to the lost site began to feel changes of their own. Electric clocks gained seconds when they passed near the park. Heart monitors beeped faintly out of sync, then corrected themselves. Doctors at nearby clinics swore that some patients recovering from cardiac failure reported dreams of the blue halls. And among the clergy, something stranger began. A priest named Father Ignacio Ramirez, who had once served as chaplain at San Gabriel, claimed to receive confessions from people who weren't there. He would sit in the booth, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic, and hear voices whisper in his ear. Not in language, but in rhythm, a cadence that matched his own pulse. It isn't sin they speak of, he said to a fellow Jesuit. It's memory. They ask me to remember them. The Vatican dispatched an investigator, Sister Helena Marquez, a scholar of theology and physics. She interviewed Ramirez, then visited the site herself. Standing on the cracked earth, she reported hearing the hum faintly through the soles of her shoes. Her pulse slowed in response. Later, she wrote in her private report, "This is not a haunting nor a miracle. It is the persistence of empathy. The residue of care has accumulated so densely that it bends matter. Perhaps this is what resurrection truly means, continuity through compassion." When asked by the curia if she believed the phenomenon divine, she hesitated. "No," she said softly, "but it is holy." Her report never reached Rome. By 1987, the phrase Arros hypothesis had entered the fringe journals of parapsychology, often misquoted or sensationalized. It became legend, the idea that intense human emotion, when sustained within confined architecture, could crystallize into sentience. The popular press dubbed it the living hospital. Most scientists ignored it, but quietly, some continued to test it. In 1989, a team of Chilean engineers studying underground acoustic anomalies recorded faint rhythmic vibrations emanating from the granite bedrock, identical in pattern to those documented at San Gabriel. The source could not be located. When they increased microphone sensitivity, they captured a whisper so low it barely registered as language. After enhancement, one word emerged: continue. The report was buried. The lead researcher resigned, but the idea refused to die. Decades later, after the collapse of Argentina's military archives into public record, the AROS hypothesis resurfaced. Historians found evidence that other facilities, hospitals, orphanages, sanatoriums, had reported similar low-frequency disturbances after periods of intense human suffering. Always the same frequency, always 62 seconds apart. And in every case, the structures had eventually been demolished, yet the pulse persisted underground. It was then that scholars began to speak quietly of a pattern far greater than a single building, that perhaps San Gabriel had not vanished at all, but dispersed, its rhythm diffused through the very infrastructure of the city, into the grid, the pipes, the pulse of Buenos Aires itself. And if that were true, they reasoned, then every time someone in that city drew breath in compassion, or touched another in mercy, or prayed for healing, the building would remember. And somewhere, far beneath their feet, something would hum in reply. By the early 1990s, Buenos Aires had stopped asking questions. The memory of San Gabriel had faded from official language, its name swallowed by the bureaucracy that had once feared it. But the silence that replaced it was not peace. It was a kind of sleep. The collective forgetting of something that still breathed beneath the city's skin. The district surrounding the site never recovered its equilibrium. Electronic devices continued to fail in unpredictable ways. Radios caught brief fragments of hospital chatter, recorded decades earlier. Some nights, lights would flicker in houses miles away, synchronized perfectly to the old rhythm, 62 seconds apart. A faint metallic scent accompanied these moments, like ozone after lightning. No one knew why. No one wanted to. The government finally declared the land unstable and ordered it sealed under layers of concrete. They paved a small road over it, planted trees, built a playground. It became an anonymous patch of green in a city too crowded to care. Children played where the trauma had once stood. They ran, laughed, fell, and bled on the soil that still pulsed with forgotten compassion. One afternoon, a boy named Tomas fell from a swing and cut his hand on the edge of a buried stone. His mother lifted him, soothed him, pressed a tissue to the wound. As she did, the streetlights along the avenue flickered, and for exactly 72 seconds, the hum returned. Soft, distant, comforting. No one else noticed, but the boy did. He said it sounded like a lullaby. News of strange phenomena began surfacing again in the medical community. Surgeons at a nearby hospital reported anomalous recoveries, patients regaining consciousness moments before brain death, arrhythmias spontaneously synchronizing to perfect regularity, wounds closing faster than expected. All incidents occurred at 5:47 a.m. The reports were dismissed as coincidence until one technician, while calibrating an ECG monitor, recorded an unexplained background signal. It was faint, rhythmic, and perfectly stable, 62 beats per minute. The origin was traced to the hospital's main power grid. When they shut off the current, the signal continued. Aros's name reappeared in conversations among physicists and theologians alike. The Aros hypothesis became more than rumor. It became doctrine. Papers circulated privately, written in cautious language. Phrases like localized temporal interference, emotional field persistence, quantum empathy resonance. None dared use the word haunting. The Jesuits of Cordoba, who had long maintained correspondence with Sister Helena Marquez before her disappearance, began to treat San Gabriel as an unacknowledged miracle. They built a small chapel on the nearest hill, its foundation laid precisely at the geometric center of the vanished hospital's old wards. The chapel had no cross, only a bronze plaque with one phrase, 62. The faithful gathered at dawn every April 6th, praying not for salvation, but for remembrance. The Mass was silent. They simply stood in stillness, hearts aligned to the pulse beneath their feet. Some claimed that in the final minute before sunrise, they could feel the ground tremble faintly, a gentle rhythm, as if the earth itself were breathing with them. The city never acknowledged these gatherings. but they grew each year, quietly, organically, like a heartbeat spreading through veins. Meanwhile, new institutions formed in secret. The Ministry of Energy established a department known only as Section 62, responsible for monitoring non-standard vibrational anomalies. Their sensors were placed in tunnels, subways, water systems, anywhere the hum might travel. What they found terrified them. The rhythm was no longer confined to the old San Gabriel site. It had migrated through the city's infrastructure, into the power lines, the sewage networks, the metal frameworks of bridges. Buenos Aires itself had begun to breathe. At first, the pulse was harmless, a background oscillation. But then, during the blackout of 1994, every substation in the city recorded a simultaneous surge. Lights across entire districts flickered once, twice, then steadied. Monitors in hospitals displayed the same pattern, a unified heartbeat pulsing across all devices. And for exactly 72 seconds, the entire electrical grid of Buenos Aires vibrated in perfect sync. When power returned, a single message appeared briefly on screens in the city's largest hospital, written in white text against static. Shift completed. Continuing observation. No one could trace its origin. The government buried the event again, but by then the people no longer needed proof. The legend had evolved into faith. San Gabriel was no longer a tragedy. It was an idea, a living testament to the possibility that memory could be mercy. In quiet corners of the city, doctors still whisper prayers before surgeries, not to saints or to God, but to the building that once remembered how to heal. They touch the cold metal of instruments and feel the faintest vibration beneath their fingers, like a response. And those who have worked too long under the flicker of fluorescent light, those who've watched a dying patient return to breath for no reason they can name, swear they sometimes hear it. The low, endless murmur of a hospital that refuses to die. They call it by the only name it ever had, San Gabriel. By the early 2000s, San Gabriel had transcended its geography. The phenomenon had become both myth and field of study, whispered in laboratories and seminaries alike. In Buenos Aires, the frase, la resonancia de la memoria, the resonance of memory, entered everyday speech. Taxi drivers used it to describe the hum of the city's power lines. Poets used it for the ache of nostalgia. But to a growing number of scientists and theologians, it described something literal, the idea that the human capacity for empathy could leave a measurable imprint on the world. The Eros hypothesis, long dismissed as pseudoscience, resurfaced at conferences under different names. The physicists called it temporal cohesion fields. Neuroscientists named it collective mnemonic retention. The Jesuits, more poetic, referred to it as divine resonance, the possibility that compassion itself could bend reality, sustaining moments long after the flesh that felt them was gone. In 2003, a Chilean research group detected rhythmic electromagnetic emissions along the Andes, identical to the San Gabriel frequency. A year later, Peruvian seismic sensors recorded faint subharmonics at 62-second intervals, unrelated to tectonic activity. The same rhythm had been documented under the Atacama salt flats, the ruins of old missions in Bolivia, and the underground tunnels beneath Cartagena. The pulse had spread, or perhaps it had always been there, waiting to be recognized. Governments ignored it. The church debated it. The people accepted it. And yet, not all resonance was gentle. In certain hospitals built over old sites of suffering, leprosaria, orphanages, asylums, staff began reporting subtle phenomena. Equipment malfunctioning, corridors inexplicably warm, faint murmurs rising through the floors. Patients sometimes woke from surgery claiming they'd dreamed of a place of light where the doctors never stopped working. One surgeon, Dr. Emilio Vega, began documenting these accounts. He noticed a pattern. Each description matched the architecture of San Gabriel down to the placement of its windows and wards, details no living person could know. He compiled these testimonies into a private archive titled Echoes of Care. When he died, his daughter donated it to the University of Buenos Aires, where it remains sealed under restricted access. But copies leaked. And through those fragments, the myth of San Gabriel evolved into something larger. A belief that every act of kindness, every hand held in suffering, every whispered comfort creates a trace in the fabric of existence, a microscopic echo that accumulates over generations until it becomes self-aware. This belief spread beyond Argentina. In Colombia, pilgrims began visiting abandoned hospitals, lighting candles and leaving notes for lost relatives. In Peru, an artist collective built a monument of mirrored steel in the shape of an open-heart monitor, engraved with the number 62. In Mexico, a group of biophysicists conducted experiments with isolated rooms filled only with recordings of prayer and human laughter, searching for electromagnetic change. They found it. And then came the Vatican's formal statement. In 2011, under Pope Benedict XVI, a confidential encyclical circulated among clergy worldwide, warning against the worship of phenomena born from human empathy, detached from divine grace. The text mentioned no names, no places, but among those who had studied the history, its meaning was clear. The Church feared San Gabriel, not for its danger, but for its implication that salvation might not require God at all. Yet the faithful continued to gather. Every April 6th at 5:47 a.m., crowds formed silently in the park that covered the vanished hospital. They brought candles, stethoscopes, old clocks. When the first light of dawn touched the city, a faint shimmer would pass over the grass, and the hum, always the same, always gentle, would begin. No one spoke, no one prayed. They simply stood, breathing in rhythm with the invisible pulse beneath their feet. Among them each year was an elderly woman who carried a camera. Lucia Falcon, her hair now silver, her eyes faintly blue in certain light. She never spoke to reporters. She never sought recognition. She would stand at the fence, close her eyes, and whisper something to the ground. Gracias por recordarlo. On the final morning of her life, in 2019, the hum did not stop. It grew louder, filling the air like the sound of a great organ played beneath the earth. People said the vibration reached across the city, syncing clocks, streetlights, and heartbeats for exactly 72 seconds. Then it ceased, leaving behind a silence so deep that birds refused to sing for an hour. When the sound faded, the old plaque at the chapel cracked cleanly in two. The number 62 split apart, yet both halves continued to glow faintly for several minutes, pulsing one last time in perfect unison. No one buried Lucia. Her body was never found. But days later, her camera was discovered near the gate. Inside was a single photograph, blurry, overexposed, yet unmistakable. It showed the hospital, whole, alive, lights burning in every window. Behind the glass stood countless figures, silhouettes in motion, and among them, at the center, a woman in a white gown holding the hand of a man in a lab coat, both looking toward the dawn. In the years that followed, the hum of San Gabriel became part of the continent's mythology. Not an urban legend, but a quiet undercurrent in the collective mind of the South. Across Argentina, Peru, and Chile, people began to speak of the kind rhythm, that imperceptible beat that seemed to surface whenever someone cared for another in silence. Some said it was only imagination, the echo of an old story told too many times. Others said it was proof that mercy could leave fingerprints. Historians never found consensus. The Eros hypothesis was archived, debated, forgotten, rediscovered. It appeared in academic journals under pseudonyms and in poetry as metaphor. But the evidence, the electromagnetic irregularities, the recurring frequency, the inexplicable synchrony between clocks and heartbeats, refused to vanish completely. In 2022, a team of anthropologists from Cordoba began excavations beneath the old park, seeking to verify the legend. They expected soil samples and rusted debris. What they found was different. 18 meters below ground, encased in limestone, lay a structure not made of concrete or steel, but of something smooth and translucent, like polished bone. It was curved, organic, almost breathing beneath their lamps. When the archaeologists touched it, their instruments failed. Every compass spun north and stopped. The hum returned, faint but unmistakable. They recorded it for 48 hours. The rhythm never changed. 62 beats per minute. The government sealed the site again. The official statement was brief. Natural gas pocket, risk of explosion. But those who had been there couldn't forget the warmth that radiated from the material, or the faint scent of lilacs in the air, a fragrance last described in the wards of San Gabriel. At the same time, the hum began to surface elsewhere. Hospitals across South America reported sporadic surges of inexplicable electrical activity. monitors blinking alive in empty rooms, machines running without power. Nurses described moments when, in the silence between breaths, they could feel the walls around them pulse gently. Not threatening, simply alive. In Lima, a child recovering from fever told his mother about a dream where doctors made of light leaned over him, whispering the number 62. In Bogota, a janitor cleaning an abandoned clinic heard footsteps behind him and the soft clink of surgical instruments, though he was alone. And in Santiago, a nun caring for the dying claimed that just before a patient passed, the heart monitor always stabilized, the pulse falling into perfect rhythm, 60 beats per minute, as if something unseen were helping the heart remember how to end. The Vatican never commented again. The world moved on. But among those who had studied the old archives, a quiet certainty grew. San Gabriel had not ended. It had dispersed. It had become the hidden organ of a continent, a slow, patient memory beating beneath the surface of everything. They began to call it El Corazón del Sur, the heart of the South. It was not a place. It was a rhythm. In that rhythm, the hospitals built new wings. Patients woke from comas whispering words they couldn't explain. Electric grids stabilized after decades of failure. Cities pulsed in harmony for the first time in generations. And every April 6th at 5:47 a.m. in Buenos Aires, the park where San Gabriel once stood filled with dew that glowed faintly blue. The air trembled. For 72 seconds, the entire district breathed. The hum could be heard again, not loud, not frightening, only steady, kind, eternal. If one stood very still, one could almost make out words in the vibration, like a choir singing beneath the earth. No language, only intention, only care. It sounded like the turning of pages, like the rustle of bed sheets, like someone walking softly down a corridor at dawn, carrying light. And though the city had long forgotten the names of the lost, the rhythm remembered every one of them, not as ghosts, but as moments. Every sigh, every heartbeat, every act of mercy folded into an infinite loop of recollection, because the miracle of San Gabriel was never disappearance. It was persistence, the refusal of kindness to die. Somewhere, deep below the ground, the building still hums, steady and certain, whispering in the language of all things that have ever healed another, shift continuing.